We did just watch the Pete Buttigieg documentary on Amazon, Mayor Pete. Ooh. I think all of us just feel like you said, like when you watched it last night, you had to just sort of walk aimlessly back and forth in your apartment for 2 hours because of how it made you feel.
Yeah, I think I knew how bad this was going to make me feel because I like put off watching it until like 1 a.m. and I was right because I felt like I swallowed like a charcoal briquette. I was just, it felt so fucking bad. It felt so fucking bad for so many reasons. And not in the way of like, oh, he won because he's transportation secretary. As you'll find, I think we'll all agree that it's like the main thing I got out of Pete watching this was like, we were like afraid of this guy. We were thinking for hours every day, like, how do we stop this juggernaut?
That's why I felt so bad. Because I watched this thing and I thought, how did I ever have any emotional investment in this? What was wrong with me that I had feelings of any kind for this fucking guy? That he occupied a fucking fragment of my mind at any given moment. It's just like, fuck. Deep indictment of
you
me.
Even
I know. Me taking huge L watching this.
You even see it in the documentary that like as it goes on, the like Pete's eunuchs that work for him, they slowly realize that the guy who they've been gassing up this entire time, this guy that they say is going to change politics, all he is the first paragraph on every Wikipedia article. That's all he is. He's nothing. He's got shit. He's got fucking nothing.
No juice.
Nothing.
He's juiceless.
I wrote it down in my. I took like 5 pages of notes, and I said, he is the most swagless man in the world. Evan Bayh sold the remaining swag in Indiana in 1998. He has less juice. There are people in fucking Dusseldorf who have way more swag than Pete Buttigieg. He's got shit. He's got nothing. He's ass.
Fuck. You're so right about Indiana too, man. Like, look at look at fucking Mike Pence. He's literally without moisture. He's got no juice.
They're out of it. They have no juice. They have no sauce. Freddie Gibbs like took the last juice that was in. It was there. It was in Gary because Evan Bayh wasn't even thinking about Gary when he sold the last swag. There was like an ounce of swag in Gary, and Gibbs was like, "Okay, I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna leave. Like, bye. Yeah. I'm never coming back."
They experienced swag brain drain.
Evan Bayh, it was like when Chicago sold our parking meters. Evan Bayh was like, no, we're selling our swag to Morgan Stanley, but we're going to rent it back. And we're actually going to have more swag. And the result is this fucking imbecile who can say, hello, how are you in 8 languages and claims he's a polyglot. He's an idiot.
He can ask for the bathroom on 4 continents.
So, I mean, not only did I have like a similar sinking feeling watching this movie of like, holy fuck, how did anyone think that this dude was ever going to be president or like a conceivable threat to anything? I mean, he is
a threat to anything.
He's
just
like
a fucking road apple.
Comprehensively one of the most empty automatons I've ever seen. And Felix, you mentioned that his automaton slowly realized like he doesn't believe in anything, stand for anything, or just there's nothing there. To me, the most harrowing part of this movie was watching Chasen realize that.
Oh God, yeah.
That left me with like the really sickest feeling was the parts with
because like
Chasen.
He's locked in there with him. Like we get to go home.
Remember we did that New York Times article about how Chasen is adjusting to life, or rather not adjusting to life in Washington D.C. Just like add this in the free Chasen file because holy shit. I mean, against my better judgment, I really feel bad for this guy. I feel really bad
I have
for him after
full sympathy for Chasen. Yeah. I mean, he's corny.
Yeah, he is corny.
He's a herb. I probably wouldn't want to hang out with him, but he seems like genuinely a decent person.
He seems like a sweet, like lame guy. He seems like what Chasen should be. Chasen should be like the type of guy he should be married to is like one of the men who lives in Stars Hollow and Gilmore Girls.
Absolutely. He should be Taylor Dosey's secret husband.
Yeah.
Or Kirk. Yes. Actually, I think he'd be happier with Kirk.
He would be like, Kirk, I like think your body is sexy. Like I like how you're unique. Like because he's a sweet man. He's like a sweet little.
It's like the only way to hate him is if you just are totally internet poisoned and anyone wholesome or like cringy or chuggy is worse than being a Nazi, you know? He's a fine guy, and he does not deserve this.
No.
I would say he's the most kidnapped man alive.
I got a big like sort of Johnny Gosh vibes from their whole relationship. It's strange. Look, let's just get into the movie. I'll save the Kamala article for the end because I think people want to hear about this film. But like for me, like the chasing parts were like among the queasiest. It made me feel really bad. But like I will say that like to the end that like Jason does seem like a fairly corny but still sincere, like a decent person, and particularly like the aspects of Chasen on the campaign trail or Chasen with Pete, where it just seems like in a corny way, like Chasen does seem to be to care a lot about, and like it means a lot to him personally, the thought of like young LGBT people in this country, like their experiences of coming out and their feelings of like what it would mean to have an openly gay man run for president or like speak for them. Like he seemed very like emotionally connected to the experience of, you know, growing up as a gay teenager in, you know, parts of this country where that's maybe like not the still like accepted, or it can still be a very difficult thing. Pete evinces none of that. And there are so many parts where Chasen is trying to get him to like come out of his shell and talk more about his experience. And Pete plays it off like, it doesn't come naturally for me to talk about my feelings. You know, the more private of a feeling it is, like the more powerful it becomes. But like Pete just has just Chasen trying to get like to wring the same kind of like the same sort of care and depth of feeling that he has regarding like the experience of being gay in America out of Pete was so painful to watch.
I think the best, like the thing that epitomized, like early on, they really, like people said this documentary is like bad and hollow, but I actually think it's like, I think the documentary makers kind of knew what they were doing here. I think they still like followed the assignment of like, hey, make a documentary about this really inspiring guy. But the editing in here is very, someone in here is a fellow traveler at least, because
it's got to be.
Yeah, there's a scene early on where Chasen is talking about, it's like in the first 2 minutes of it, where he's like, yeah, Pete's really good at talking to people and relating to people. And the scene immediately that it cuts into is Pete talking to an old woman in South Bend and saying, oh, is that a dinner table? I love dinner tables.
And the other
insane.
And also, there's one way that this portrait could be sympathetic. There's one way that the Pete Buttigieg we see struggling to simulate human feeling in this movie could be maybe mined for pathos instead of horror, is if the narrative that you were going with while watching it is this guy, he has this stuff he wants to do for people. He has this vision for politics, making things better, but to do it, he has to try to evince an emotionalism and like a charisma that he doesn't have. And like the gap there would be sort of the tragic element of the story. But there is not a single frame of this movie that talks about anything he plans to do about anything. Like there's nothing about policy at all. And like that is a choice by the editors and by the filmmakers. Like either they're totally lobotomized by capitalism to the point where they don't think there's any possibilities. So of course he doesn't have there's no reason to talk about policy. Or they're leaving this void there so that all you can watch is this guy trying to be president, even though he's not temperamentally suited to being a candidate, for no reason, just to do it. And that's terrifying.
The only the only hint that you get of anything that he actually wants to accomplish as president or on the campaign trail is to include people in conversations.
Yep.
That's basically the only thing that he shows any interest in accomplishing or doing. It's stunning.
Yep.
He's got like absolutely no sauce, no vision. It didn't even seem like he was even that driven or ambitious to like hold office.
No,
It's like he did not seem like he was one of like as I assumed he would be, or like from my impressions of him, like heretofore this documentary, that he's someone like psychotic, like a psychotic striver and climber. Like he didn't even come across at all. He didn't seem to really want to be doing, or it's not that he wanted or not wanted to do it. He just seems so flat and like just nothing the entire time.
Like you can't even get at like an insecurity that he wants to compensate for by public approval.
Yes.
You can't get at anything. You can't just get on ego. You can't just get on because there's not a lot of like flashy displays of narcissism. It's just this drive. He's the fucking just this Terminator.
There's nothing interesting about him at all that comes across in this movie. If you like him or hate him.
He has absolute void at the center of it, and it's terrifying.
The one thing that this movie says about Pete Buttigieg that I think is accurate and that one can honestly say is that he is not a traditional politician.
Nope.
Nor is he a traditional human being. All right, so let's get into the movie itself, because the very first shot of this movie, the very first thing you see on screen, I really did appreciate, because it was a framed photo of Pete and Chasen on the cover of Time magazine, and all I could think about was the scene in The Big Lebowski where he's in the Big Lebowski's office and it's the mirror of Time Person of the Year on it.
Yeah,
and he's just looking into it. And then it's like a Chasen is like the first thing you see is Chasen talking to the director. And like Pete is about to sit down for like the vast majority of the like sort of interview portions with him that will serve as kind of the foundation for him narrating the documentary. And Chasen wants the director to ask him about like how did it feel for so long to deny your authentic self? And I've seen people who are what does he say? Who did everything to climb the ladder without being their authentic self. And like he's like, do you think you could ask him that question? And it's like he wants the director to ask him that question because like he's asked him that question multiple times and probably not getting anything that seems like a real answer.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's an interesting, like this, there's a continued harping on like, oh, your genuine self in this movie by Chasten and by people who are trying to lob softballs at Pete. And I think what the people lobbing softballs don't realize, and what Chasten realizes about an hour into the movie is like, no, this is Pete's authentic self.
Yeah.
He's not hiding anything. This is just all there is. Mm-hmm.
He's like a more well-read version of Chauncey the gardener and Being There.
Yeah, but instead of watching TV, it was like reading McKinsey reports or something, like eating spreadsheets.
No, that's what I mean. He's a literate version of Chauncey.
Yeah.
The very first time you see Pete, like not being interviewed, but like a little taste of him, like behind the scenes, he's sitting at a desk signing stuff, singing the "I'm Just a Bill" song from Schoolhouse Rock.
Because he's reminding himself like how laws work. Because he forgot. He doesn't know.
I don't think it's that. I think it's him trying to he's like, oh, I know the camera's on me. Better do something that's like sort of quirky and relatable. And then it's like Schoolhouse Rock. Wouldn't that be cute if I was signing bills, singing that funny song that we all remember?
Yeah, I think that. Yeah, a classic bit of that human camouflage he likes to throw up.
Maybe he is like the Barney bit. Like he's like, Pete, what do you listen to? Like pump yourself up. Oh, like I've always really liked Clean Up. Been getting into foreign music like Frere Jacques recently.
Another aspect of this film that I think is worth mentioning is that the entire movie, absent like a couple songs. Well, we'll get to the song at the end, which is great. But the entire movie is scored with that kind of very, very treacly NPR music that they play in the background of their podcasts and radio shows. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
And it sets a tone. Let's put it that way. I have your not a single moment of him on screen feels authentic, but as we talked about, like you begin to realize over the course of the movie that it is authentic and it's really unsettling. Yeah. It's really unsettling. And like, for instance, like he's sitting in the chair being interviewed by the director, and he's like, I chose to do this, like not because I was like any great man of history or that I would just sort of, part the seas and have history be shaped around me. But, and then I don't know what he says after that, but it's a very, very weird telling moment by Pete. And it's like the whole point of the movie is like, can an introvert really be president?
Yeah, it's way more about that than any other like group.
Yeah, that is way more essential to his identity that come across in this movie than being gay is. It's like, can an int J become president?
Introvert is really like, I would say, the absolute most generous way you could describe him. It's like introvert implies that there is something hidden in him, that he's showing you a facade.
He's like he's a dead plug. He's a dead electrical outlet.
Yeah, he's all shell, no egg.
Like there's like a frequency that like when people interact with each other, like they hit, he's not giving it off. It's just not there at all.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, there's nothing there with Pete, and you feel bad for Chasen, but I would like to talk about the true star of this documentary, and that is one absolute baddie. I'm talking about Liz Smith. Liz Smith is the star of this documentary.
She's kind of a firecracker,
I love her.
I'd say.
She is the campaign game master. And like she's there to just spit real talk and say things like, it's about who he is as a person. She's the best, and she's spitting facts. She's spitting campaign truths to Pete Buttigieg. She's like, she cuts through all the bullshit in the room, and she's like, listen, you could go up there and give a baller-ass answer about North Korea, and no one will give a shit. She's such a badass.
I wrote down in the second thing I noticed, the second thing I took in my notes was that she was like chewing through her gums. There's Adderall instant release. There's Adderall extended release. Liz Smith is on Adderall eternal release. She's booted.
Yeah. It's amazing how they frame her as this absolute fucking off the wall maverick, like bomb thrower, because she says the F word sometimes.
Yep. And
it's like, oh my God, she's the real life Malcolm Tucker. She just swore.
There's so much great Liz shit in this movie because you really like Pete will do the exact same thing every time they focus on him, like giving an answer or like giving part of his stump speech at a town hall. And 2 out of the 4 times Liz will be like, that was pretty good. You're a fucking rock star, but you got to fucking remember that these fucking people don't understand how fucking real you are. And then one of the times she's like, Pete, you're too smart. That was too many facts. People won't fucking get how good you are. And then the 4th time, which will no different than anything else, she'll go, that was fucking perfect. I love you.
Dude, Felix, I was going insane because like there's a scene where they're doing debate prep and like they're teeing up like the big grand slam question for him about being gay and like, what, like, or sort of like what, oh, you're just like a white man, like, how can you, how can you demand change when it's just more of the same? And like, he rattles off some answer about, when I was serving in Afghanistan, like I could still lose my job under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And then Liz is like, you're giving the people straight lines. You're giving them straight lines. Their whole life is straight lines. You got to get some fire in your belly. They want to hear about you. They want to hear about this, I think she describes him as, look at this young Midwestern veteran who's kind of out there. and then they show the real debate where that question actually happens, and the answer he gives on stage is virtually identical to the one he gave in debate prep. And you see her in the back in the spin room watching it, and she's doing the Nicholson nod, like yes, Pete's killing it right now. And it was just like I don't understand. And then like the other really funny part about her job is like she is the master of earned media, and that's another interesting thing this movie shows is just how important earned media is for the success or not of a candidate. And like
they didn't earn all of it. They gave some money to some dude in Nigeria. I will go to my grave insisting.
Yeah.
No, fuck. They should have talked to him for the
only person who could have pitched Pete as a human would have been that guy.
Yeah.
So my favorite scene with Liz Smith is, keep in mind, in the context of a police shooting where a black man was killed in the streets of South Bend, Liz Smith is breaking down the media hits for him, and she breaks the bad news to Pete that she goes, Meghan McCain, who's a big fan of yours, said you looked lost out there. And Joy Behar, another big fan, said you didn't seem prepared. And she's just giving them the rundown on what happened on The View that morning.
Yeah. Can we talk about the town hall after the shooting a little bit?
Yes.
Because that is when I started, that is when I got a stomach ache. So the way that Liz Smith and like Pete and Pete's eunuchs talk about it, like right when this storyline of the documentary, the shooting in South Bend first happens, it's sort of it's like almost like they're trying to make it seem like the police and the man who was killed conspired to ruin Pete's life. Like, how could this happen to Pete?
And this was right when he was preparing for the first debate.
Yeah. So Pete goes to a town hall, and everyone, like all these black residents of South Bend, are like rightfully yelling at him and being like, what the fuck are you going to do? Like, what? Like this has been going on forever. Nothing's changing. Like, what are you actually proposing? And Pete, I wrote this down because it's so insane. It shows him as just having nothing. He said he sees all this. He sees these people like crying and yelling, and he goes, "This is the beginning of the conversation, not the end. I believe in this city. Thank you for coming."
Okay,
and then that is what I realized what Democrats meant when they said George Floyd is on the ballot. They meant that every time that a black person is killed by police, that one Democratic mayor will hold a town hall where they get yelled at and will pretend to cry, like Pete does at the press scrum after. Pete was the blueprint.
I gotta shout out Ben Mora from Seeking Derangements, because he pointed this out about this very scene in the documentary that seemed very fishy to me. And it's the part where Pete is saying, it's like, okay, he got a couple of very angry questions from the black residents of South Bend. And he gives this absolute pablum, just absolute drivel about this is the beginning of the conversation, not the end. And I'm here to hear your voices because this community matters so much to me. And the camera focuses on Pete, and then he's like, thanks, bye. And then there's this like smattering of applause and wooting that really seemed like it was edited in.
You want our votes, which I doubt you're going to get it. Do your job just so you can have a moral compass when you leave this place, dog. Because right now, the streets is crazy, man.
This is the beginning of the conversation, not the end. And I need everyone to participate and stay involved. So you can decide whether or not you believe in me. But I believe in this city. I believe in you, and this is part of it. And we'll keep it up. And I thank everyone for caring enough to be part of this, and I thank everyone for believing that there's a way forward in our community, because this is our home. So thank you.
How do you think this is going?
Because they did not show the crowd reacting to him. You just saw his face, and you heard what I think is maybe dubbed applause to make it seem like he didn't shuffle out of that fucking town hall to crickets or boos. Because it would have been, because it's like, he just had these people like really angry, pouring their heart out, and he was just like gave some answer where he's just like, "We'll continue to talk about this, and I care very much. Bye." He went back to his home planet, and then there's just like this weird moment of like canned applause. I mean, it could be real, but when Ben pointed that out to me and I saw it in the movie, it seemed very much like a little bit of journalistic sleight of hand or documentary fakery.
I would think that if you Shazammed that applause, you would originally find it was used in 1998 for a talk show called The Jimmy Fallon of Malaysia. You'll hear, if you isolate that audio, you will hear people at Pete's supposed town hall, the supposed ovation he got, yelling in Malay.
And someone else has pointed this out about this documentary, but the way they deal with this police shooting and Pete's just general, like his record as mayor of South Bend as it relates to the black population of his city, it seemed like they were like only focusing on this police shooting as like that was the incident that like, you know, he dealt with gracefully, and not the whole secondary issue about how the black police chief was like fucking like fired from his job for trying to blow the whistle on a lot of the shit that was going on in the police department under Pete's watch. It seemed like they were like a retconning of like that was his racial issue on the campaign, and not a bunch of other stuff that he dealt with even less satisfactorily than this police shooting.
Yeah, but it gives them that. I think a lot of it is based on what footage there is, and that town hall is robust with drama. You know, everything else is just sort of a headline.
Okay, can we talk about the scene, the date night scene between him and Jason? Because that's when I really started to feel nauseous. Is they're at like I don't know, like Dairy Queen or something?
Yeah, they're at Dairy Queen.
They're at the DQ, and they're eating their little cups of ice cream. And Jason goes, "Can we eat the ice cream before dinner?" And Pete goes, "It's date night. You can do whatever you want." And then they just like sit across a Formica table, staring at each other.
Yeah.
Just sort of moving a blizzard around a cup.
That is when, Matt, I think you said that Pete is Don and Jason is Betty.
Yeah.
That's when that really hit me. But it's like, man, Don had swag.
Oh, Amber said that. Yeah. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, Amber said it. Yeah. Don had swag. Like, Pete's version, like, Don is like, he's a cipher because he's like, yeah, he stole someone's identity and he had this fucked up life. Pete just sucks. Like, in Pete's version, Pete couldn't even do the carousel. Pete's version of the carousel is like reading the Wikipedia summary for the article on Afro-pessimism to an autistic child at a UN event. And it makes 12 people in the world cry. And they're all journalists.
Yeah, well, that's just it. Is that we watch this, and one of the big questions that comes up is, how did this absolute zero briefly be one of the real top contenders for the Democratic nomination in the polls and in everything? And it's because of the fucking media. Because this guy's like clear reptilian hollowness is least perceptible to the people who are most influential in determining the narrative of who runs for president. That is how fucked it is. We've got a situation where the people who basically have no lizard detectors are in charge of determining political narratives while everybody else is interacting with the real world, and most of them see Pete Buttigieg and see him as this hollow bullshit artist. Unless you're a journalist or the civilians, the non-journalists who are most like journalists, fucking early state primary voters, fucking Iowa and fucking New Hampshire voters who basically all spend the entire presidential race acting like journalists and consuming about as much media about the fucking race as journalists produce. Just guppies, just like fucking blue whales eating tons of krill. And they see him through journalist eyes, through the meritocratic eyes, where having the resume and saying the words and going through the motions is all that you need to do. Terrifying.
There was another scene where, Liz Smith says of Pete Buttigieg, in particular, like his answers about, being a gay man. She says, he sounds like a Tin Man up there. She says, he sounds like the fucking Tin Man up there. And then she's really happy with his answer, like later, which sounded identical to what he was saying in the debate prep. But there's a moment where he talks on stage about how when he was a kid, he would have done anything to not be gay. Mm-hmm. Or if there was a pill he could have taken, I would have taken it.
He says one of the most insane things I've ever heard. He says the pill thing, but he's like, if there was a knife that could cut out the gay part of my soul, I would have used it. But thank God that we don't have that knife. Like there's a possibility of that knife being made.
Yeah.
So when Pete was into the CIA,
he's like, thank God the research had not gotten to the critical point when I was a teenager.
Yeah, like when Pete was in the CIA, they're like, "Hey, we have this like knife that only cuts out the gay part of you. It's like a neutron bomb."
And this is also like I forget if it's the same context, but like he talks about how he's like when he came home from Afghanistan from his, I need to underscore, 3-month tour of duty in an office in Afghanistan. He says, I realize that I have only one life to live and that I better start living it. Meaning that like he came out of the closet when he was 33 years old. And married Chasen not too long after that. And then Chasen says, like, to the comment about, if I would have done anything not to be gay as a teenager, which is like, I'm not saying that that's like an inauthentic thing for someone to feel, especially like, growing up in a place where being gay is like not accepted. But Chasen seems sort of hurt by that comment. And he asked Pete, he was like, sort of like, did you really mean that? Or like, did you want to commit suicide? Which is like, it's a very profound like question. And I'm sure it's one that like a lot of gay teenagers have felt in this country. And Pete gives him absolutely nothing. Pete just stares at him blankly, like he doesn't register it. And it's just very strange because I really felt in this movie that like whatever Pete's experience of being gay and coming out of the closet was in America is categorically different than Chasen's and like most every other gay person who goes through that. I mean, that's just that's the feeling I got watching it. Like there's something that's not, that's clicking between the two of them where like their experience of identity is like categorically different from each other's.
What would you say the point is where Chasten realizes that like oh my God, I've been kidnapped?
It's the scene. It's the Iowa caucus night when they're watching TV and they're watching the other candidates give their speeches, and Chasen remarks to him, "You're the only candidate whose spouse wasn't on stage." And Pete just goes, Pete goes, yeah, but you were up at the end. You can't. And he says, yeah, but no, like I wasn't on stage with you giving the speech. And he was just like, yeah, we'll get you out there.
Ooh.
Yeah, and it goes like Jill was on stage, and he goes, well, in the back, yeah.
Ooh. Yeah, Iowa is a great scene because Pete like kind of stole it, but like it did not seem like a happy night. No. They were all 12 of Pete's eunuchs were packed into a DoubleTree with Pete and Chasten. 2 of these imbeciles are throwing a Nerf football back and forth over the distance of 5 feet. And there is, that's stultifying everyone else's spouses are up there. Including, I want to remind you, Joe, who was termed a non-viable fetus like an hour into votes counting. Like Joe, like that shit, man. Joe, like, does anyone remember how bad Joe fucking tanked?
And New Hampshire too.
Oh my God! Finished 5th in New Hampshire.
Okay, like there's a point where Pete is talking about the Iowa caucus, and he says like they always say there's 3 ways out of Iowa as a candidate: you win, you finish close, or you exceed expectations. But those are the only ways out of Iowa. Not for Joe Biden. Not
Sometimes
for Joe.
The only way out is through the bottom.
Yeah. Okay. There's another really really painful moment with Pete and Chasen, and like similar to what we were talking about earlier. And they're talking about trying to be parents and the possibility of having kids together and starting a family. And Pete says to Chasen, I think about parenting, or when I think about being a parent, I think about it almost completely through you. It was, he's just sort of like, when I imagine myself as a father, I think about you having, like, you just doing that role. Or like, he did not seem very like enthusiastic about the idea of starting a family.
He was essentially admitting that he was only going to have a kid because Chasen wants one.
Yeah.
That's pretty clear. He's telling it. It's like, if you were not here saying we need to have a kid, I would not be having one.
Yeah. Do you remember the scene? With where before the Iowa caucus, where Pete and Joe meet and have a little dance with each other?
Oh God, yes.
That was awesome.
And it's like and right before that, they show Biden supporters like firefighters for Biden, like pushing some Pete supporter and like roughing them up. And I was like, God, no wonder he won. Two other very funny Pete on the campaign trail moments from Iowa is like it's at the same event. And he's doing the handshake line, and this woman like asks him. She's like, she says, my brother died of a drug overdose, and now I am, the guardian of his children, and I'm raising them. And I was just like, I want to where do you stand on like issues related to addiction and like she, it's like obviously like this is someone with a very like tragic, touching story, and he just goes, check our campaign website. We have a whole thing about mental health and addiction. Thank you for your story. And then a girl comes up to him and thanks him because she says, I came out as autistic thanks to you. And then she was just sort of like, it was like his coming out story. She was like, I came out as autistic and that's hard. And he was like, again, thank you for your story.
I think she was like trying to give him a hint.
Yeah, but
I came out as autistic, Pete, and I'm glad I did. You got something to say?
I just want to note that there's a lot of David Axelrod later on in this movie, because Axelrod, who is sort of Obama's first run for the presidency, he was the Karl Rove figure.
He was the hand of the king.
Yeah.
He was Obama's most loyal band.
And in this movie, he's basically a Greek chorus. Like he sings the fortunes of Pete as they go up and down.
Yeah. And he's friends with Pete. And he says at one point in sort of like the last third of the movie, Pete isn't really someone who emotes, which is an amazing thing to say. Like, that is like, think about saying that about your friend and you just don't chew on that at all. Oh, that's weird. He doesn't really do the thing that human beings are known for. That's just something about him. Like, what, man?
Just a couple things of note about the Iowa caucus, because this was like big flashback times for me watching this part of the fucking movie. But you remember the scene with him and Biden, where like they beat each other and Biden
chopping it up at the barbecue.
He's just giving him the glad hand or whatever. And Pete says to Biden, he's like Joe, I was like I think no matter the outcome, our party's in good hands. I think we have a pretty strong hand to play here, which is something you say to your opponent when you're beating them. And then Joe just goes, that's great. I'll see you, pal. And smiles and walks away. It was just like really kind of like, I don't know. It speaks to me that Joe knew what was up before any of us did.
Yeah.
And then also
was
the
like,
scene.
This is adorable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys have fun here in these early states with their 6 delegates apiece, while I'm sitting on a fucking giant stash of Southern delegates that you cannot get anywhere near. Have fun.
Dude. Joe, oh my God. Joe is just like his impishness in this scene. The Maltese egg painting is nothing next to the Irish trickery that Joe's about to display. What a great little scene.
If you didn't know anything about that primary and you just showed someone that clip and asked who won, they'd be able to tell you.
Oh my. And it's like Pete, like I remember saying that like in 2019, I was like, Joe is going to like, I was like, I don't know if I was early in saying Joe was going to win. And then of course, like everyone else, I
you
was
were,
like,
yeah.
Oh my God. Does he know where he is? But like, I said
5th place in New Hampshire. I'm sorry. It's just amazing.
I said that like Joe was going to destroy, like Pete thinks he's good at what Joe is actually good at. And Joe is going to end up destroying him. And people would be like, later in 2020, like, oh, what the fuck are you talking about? And it's like, no, that's what Joe is born to do. Pete read Wikipedia articles. He did not. Joe was really outside, dude. Joe was really at Costco.
Yeah, you said how like the only thing that Pete proposes as like a value add is that he's gonna tell people stories or whatever the fuck, or hear their stories. You're gonna fucking tell people stories better than Joe Biden.
And like they're like, oh, Pete has such an amazing story. Wait, you mean a more amazing story than the man who lost everything like 4 times in his life?
Yeah. Yeah.
What it comes down to is Buttigieg is industry, Biden is in the streets. I mean, like that's like the contrast is there for all to see.
It's like, oh, really? You took a semester abroad to Afghanistan? That's cute. My family got decapitated the day before I fucking got inaugurated into the Senate.
Oh, wow. Your dad was a professor, so you speak all these languages? Yeah, my dad was the only white union man on the East Coast in the 1950s who, like, was broke. He is the single man disproving the book Settlers. My dad's the biggest loser in the history of the white working.
Just two more quick things from the Iowa part of this movie that I want to take note of. One is the scene where they're waiting for results to come in. And they're throwing the Nerf football around, and the eunuchs are like, they're looking at their phones all panicked because they're like, oh, like the results aren't coming in. There's massive technical difficulties. All I'll say is that in that scene, Liz Smith seemed pretty calm and not surprised with what was going on.
Yep. Very interesting.
Point number 2, and you guys can tell me if I'm wrong about this, but I want to know how you guys remember it. This movie made it seem like Bernie Sanders spoke before Pete Buttigieg that night. Do you guys remember that in the documentary?
They completely retconned it.
They show Bernie speaking, and then Pete's like, "You think we should get out there and say something?"
They make it so Pete doesn't announce victory in Iowa until days later when he technically has more SDEs, and that is not what happened. Is Pete declared victory at like 8 p.m.
Yeah, they definitely fudged that timeline.
I was there. We were there.
They don't want to emphasize that. Although they do have the thing where Bernie goes on the plane the next day, for someone to declare victory without an official tally, I think that is wrong. But they did not give you the impression in this narrative that that's what happened.
And it's just like, as the movie goes on, it becomes like among Chasen and the people around him, it becomes this question of like, there's 2 questions. It's like, one, how do we use being gay as the answer to the political problem of being a white man running for president in 2020? And I don't think they come up with a satisfactory answer. But then there's another very telling moment where Chasen says, like either rhetorically or to Pete, I think he says to the camera, to the director being interviewed, he says, what's the difference between the face the world makes you show and your shifting understanding of yourself? And it's like these very very, very disturbing realizations about like identity and or lack thereof with him as a candidate and with him as a human being, with him as a man, just in general, a spouse, a lover, a friend, a husband, a father. And it leaves you with a very queasy feeling. And then you realize that like what you're seeing of Pete on the campaign trail and the way he talks to the media, the way he talks to angry constituents, the way he talks to the people on his campaign, he talks to Chasen in the exact same way.
Oh, it's perfect.
And do you remember the scene? And this is probably like the most upsetting part of the movie. Do you remember the scene where like they're sitting at a diner and Chasen's head is on the table and they're just like Pete sits across from him and just silently starts eating a pastry or something? Yeah. And then Chasen does this little thing where his head is like on the table, and then he sticks his finger out and starts wiggling it, and then Pete just does a little finger game with him on the table. It was like this moment of like supposed to be like authentic, intimacy between a couple. This keyhole glimpse behind the curtain, but the whole thing seems so fucking stilted and fucking awkward. And like, I think there's a photo of them kissing, but like, is there any scene in this movie where they kiss each other?
Kiss backstage towards the end of the movie. It honestly kind of looks like Pete scrunches his face up a little bit before the lips hit, just because like he's
doing the Josh Holloway
like he's wincing or something.
Yeah.
It is incredibly stiff.
Pete and Josh Holloway should run again.
They should get married. I
mean, everyone says like
they should do a dynastic marriage that gets rid of our 2-party system once and for all.
Fuck the 30K voter election. That is the 5K voter election.
Just have them be sealed, like the Bene Gesserit wanted to do. Bring House Harkonnen and Atreides together.
If Pete and Josh Holloway docked, you would create the most swagless entity that has ever existed.
A human black hole, a hollow man.
Yeah.
I mean, they're both people that joined the military for their fucking resume. So, I mean, just imagine what that Saiyan fusion dance would the fucking the brain power that would fucking produce.
Wait, I think you're getting it mixed up with Tom Cotton.
Didn't Josh
Holloway
Holloway
didn't go.
also
They
serve in the
both went
military?
to Ivy League schools, but I don't think Holloway went to university.
Holloway wasn't a military guy?
Yeah,
Okay.
Tom Cotton did the Pete where he went a little bit. That's the difference between like a Democrat and
Tom Cotton
Republican
actually
who does
killed
it.
people.
No, Tom Cotton, he didn't. Tom Cotton got them to give him like a combat badge and he has bullshit medals.
we
Oh, really? So he just
Yeah.
seems like a psychopath?
no,
Yeah.
he's a psychopath. He's just one who never bothered going and killing people to get it out. Basically, like he's like Mayor Pete in that way. Really, it's Cotton and Pete who are the true mirrors of each other. Like those guys are the same guy.
Tom Cotton's medals are they're like a Lyndon Johnson's medals situation, from what I understand. But again, it's it shows how unimpressive Pete is because Cotton did win a statewide election, something Pete has never done ever.
Oh man, there's another scene where Pete is about to go out there and declare victory a second time in the Iowa caucus, and he's getting out there, and Chasen is sort of dropping a hint to him, and he's going, "Do you think you could say something, or could you speak to a gay kid out there who doesn't believe this is possible?" And then could you speak to their experience about what this means for them and you tonight? And Pete just goes, "Maybe."
They should call this movie "It Never Gets Better."
Oh man. So I mean, honestly, not much happens in this movie after Iowa because there's nothing to show. It's just
fucking
and
nosedive.
the only possibly illuminating for the historical record or for Pete as a person, the only illuminating thing that this documentary could actually portray is the Obama phone call when he dropped out. But they retcon that shit too and show a second Obama phone call where Obama's just like, "Oh, you did good, Pete." And this is after he's dropped out. They make it seem like Obama called him then and talked to him.
And I wanted to see the Obama phone call because it's Obama is the Michael Jordan of the Pete Hollow shit. Obama's actually amazing at the shit that Pete's imbeciles think that Pete is good at. Obama is putting on that human suit. He put it on better than anyone else. He was really the man at that, of just saying bullshit and people going crazy for it. That is Jordan playing a pickup game against a pretty good 8th grader.
Yeah. So yeah, not much more happens in the movie. And then there's a scene where Pete drops out and he's like, "Well, that's how you end a presidential campaign." He's like, "We just looked at the numbers and it just wasn't there." I mean, again, a complete travesty of the historical record, given what we all know actually transpired. I mean, he had no reason to drop out before Super Tuesday.
But even if he did, his justification is, we got a crowded field. Got to. If there's a crowded field, you have to get out. You got to unclutter it. It's why?
Well, he does. He does say one thing. He does let one thing slip when he goes, "Well, I mean, it's a crowded field, but we can actually help."
Yeah, exactly. We can do something.
Which is we can stop burning.
Yeah, that's the unspoken assumption there.
So, and then when he's like, "Well, that's how you end a presidential campaign," then the movie drops what I think is the best song choice, because we've already heard "High High Hopes," but those are all diegetic to the film.
Yeah.
The non-diegetic music after Pete officially drops out and hangs up the phone is "Perfect Day" by Lou Reed, and the climax of the movie is a montage of him saying goodbye to everyone over Lou Reed's "Perfect Day," which is I just started what's the Pete Buttigieg version of "Perfect Day" is we shot animals at the zoo, and later on some Netflix too. It's such a perfect day. I'm glad I spent it with Pete. You just keep me hanging on. But
during the Perfect Day scene, I expected to see an end of Casino montage where everyone who isn't Pete, who isn't Liz Smith or that ginger guy who the interview is killed.
Just gets
where
shot.
Pete's "All right, I have
into
no
a
use
ditch.
for you anymore."
Yeah. Where you going, jack off? That's his dog. Some fat guy. His dog.
He's not one of us.
Yeah, his dog fled to Costa Rica, but his puppy got arrested for drug dealing, and then that. Hey, why take a chance? God, I want a documentary about Liz Smith. She's so much more interesting than Pete Buttigieg.
Liz is awesome, and Liz throughout the movie wears some of the worst fits of all time. Liz Smith, Liz Smith, Liz Smith has money, and she dresses like a 2-episode arc villain on Freaks and Geeks. She dresses like a mean teacher on Freaks and Geeks.
I think someone pointed this out on Twitter, but there's a scene where she's wearing like a fucking Austin City Limits t-shirt, and she's like, "I'm worried our campaign's a little too white." She's wearing a Guns N' Roses t-shirt at one time. Oh, she's the best. She's such
Liz
a badass.
Smith, I bet when she gets off of work, she takes off the Austin City Limits t-shirt and puts on one of those like Target vintage Mountain Dew soda t-shirts. She's awesome. She's fucking. That's my favorite thing in the entire movie is when just her what she how good she thinks Pete does. Just it's completely random. It's RNG. It's a randomly generated number. Whether Pete was too smart or it was fucking perfect. And oh my god, I'm crying. You're the smartest.
Well, I think that's what's interesting about the movie is I think it shows what these media consultant jobs really are. It's like you're a rainmaker. So like when you're in the debate prep, you're like terrible. Got to do better. Got to be more personal. You're like the Tin Man. You're giving people straight lines. And then when the candidate gets out there on the real deal and in front of millions of people, behaves exactly the same way. Then when they get off stage, you're like, Pete, you killed it. You're the man. And so they think that you help them.
There's just commenting.
Oh.
And it obscures what Liz Smith's actual job is, which is like, hey, have Pete and Jake Tapper have a swagless off on TV. Like that, they can't show her real job because this is ostensibly a pro Pete documentary. Even though I do think there was some artistic choices here.
Yeah,
don't get me wrong.
There was a couple ops working on this movie. It had to be.
Oh yeah, there are some. There is either one Chapo success daughter or 12 fail kids in the editing room. Hard to say.
And the finale of the movie, and again, this is the least triumphant political documentary that is clearly like an advertisement for him running for president. The fucking his triumph at the end of the movie is being transportation secretary, and the last scene of the movie is him and Chasen walking hand in hand down the National Mall at night. And he's just like, wow, here's our new life as a cabinet secretary in the lamest fucking cabinet position you can possibly have in a presidential administration.
And the one that everyone now is mad at him over. because they're blaming him for supply chain stuff, which
and gas
I will say
a
little bit erroneously, but I'm not going to get in your way if you're doing that. I really don't care. Have fun.